Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Goolsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. Are you excited about this one?
You know, I was gonna open by saying I've got a big surprise for you today, Marcus, and that's that I'm excited about this episode.
Yeah.
But I genuinely am, as I am many of our episodes, but especially this one because, I think finding out how we can connect landowners with resources that can help them implement a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast is something that has been, burning in the back of my mind to get out there for a long time now. And we've got, a couple of guests today that I think can really help shed some light on that and help us get there.
Yeah, for sure. Just to add to that, I definitely get the question pretty often from landowners about cost share programs. And it's hard for me to even keep up with what is cost shareable, honestly. Especially when we start bouncing around states, and I can see where some guys like you guys that are keeping your finger on the pulse could be really helpful in that process. So, Nick, if you want to start by introducing yourself and your company and kind of what you guys do, and then we'll turn it over to you, Weston, to let you chime in.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for inviting us to come on to the podcast. Glad to be here this morning. So I started Stewart Link back 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years next month. So we've been at this for a while. Prior to that, I worked for NRCS for 12 years, and that's where I gained a lot of knowledge about some of the programs that USDA offers and just kind of how things work in that office. And that's probably obviously what allowed Stewart Link to have the success we've had, just having that background and understanding. We've also got 3 other employees that are former, NRCS guys that work with us as well. So, a lot of knowledge from that side and still learning all the time. But basically what Stewart Link tries to do is simplify that process a little bit for the landowners. A lot of people think that, that office pretty much just serves row crop farming or maybe pasture land guys. It's more of a, ag production type situation, and that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot available for timberland management, wildlife management, and those type things as well. So, I tell people all the time that, if you own land, you should probably have an application on file at USDA because there's something there that would benefit you, especially if you're trying to actively manage your land. Just a world of practices available. But what we find is that, it's not a real easy process for somebody just to go, participate in those programs. And that's not necessarily, not trying to take a shot at NRCS or USDA. It's just, it's a complicated process. First thing you have to do, especially if you own timberland, is, you got to get registered. You got to take your deed up there, prove that you own the land. There's a lot of paperwork that goes along with all of it. And I think some people just get a little intimidated by that. And, we help guide through that process. So we just try to make the whole process from A to Z easy for a landowner to participate in the programs and hopefully, achieve some of their goals for managing their property, whether it be, ag production or wildlife. I tell people all the time, wildlife stuff's my favorite. That's what I like to work on. What we do, we spend a lot of time, working with row crop farmers and ag production as well. So, and I'll let Weston add to that. Of course, Weston's background's wildlife, but he's been with us about a year now. Really glad to have him on our team here to help us, do a better job on the wildlife side of things.
Yeah, so got my undergrad at Mississippi State in wildlife, and got my master's there as well under Marcus, working with some gopher tortoise management and looking at timing of prescribed fire on that. And then after that, I worked for Mississippi Department of Wildlife for about 3 years, and now I'm working at Steward Link. Been here about a year now, and so like Nick said, we trying to make the cost share programs as easy as possible for a landowner. And so I do a lot of the wildlife and timber stuff here, and I do a little bit of the row crop as well. But, my goal is to meet with a landowner and figure out exactly what they want to do. Do they want to manage for deer, turkey, quail, whatever it may be, and then try to match these cost share programs as good as possible with what they want to do to achieve on their property. There's hundreds of different, NRCS calls them practices or enhancements that a landowner can do. And, it's kind of complex to read through hundreds of different practices. And so that's where we come in and, try to identify the best ones to implement on somebody's property. And then, we get a good plan written and submit it to NRCS. And if they get approved, well, then we work with them on finding contractors to either plant trees, do prescribed fire, dirt work, anything that we may have on that plan where they need some assistance. We stay with them through the life of a contract, and we assist them the whole way and make sure they have everything they need.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm just kind of curious. So basically, you guys are navigating what's I definitely view as a pretty complex system. And you said there's hundreds of practices. I didn't even know that.
I didn't either.
So that was a eye-opening. But I definitely have fallen into that group that has largely associated a lot of those programs with agriculture. And I guess part of that's because it was part of the Farm Bill. But I was curious if you guys could kind of shed some light on this for the average landowner. Maybe they have a couple hundred acres somewhere in the South of timberland. Or how many programs might there be? I mean, are we talking about there's probably a couple on average, or is there dozens? What are we looking at here in terms of opportunity?
Yeah, that's a good question, Marcus. So, well, you hit the nail on the head. It really is complex, and there's obviously the government doesn't intend for it to be that way, but it just kind of happens. You get all these practice codes and different programs, and just inside the NRCS office, somebody who had just off the top of my head, if you had 200 acres of timberland, I can think of 4 different programs that you could apply for, and probably go after the same conservation practices. Maybe it's prescribed burning or fire lanes or tree planting or planting native grass or, timber stand reduction. I mean, there's a whole list of things available that you can do. But, step one is to figure out which practice or which program do you even apply for. Mm-hmm. Maybe you apply for multiple. And then after that it's like Weston was saying, understand what the goals of that producer, is, and then trying to match the right practices. Sure. And, there's eligibility requirements. You have to get all this paperwork filled out to become eligible for the program. All that has to be done on the front end. So, get all these pieces of the puzzle in place before you really even get to the point of what practices do I want to do. So, yeah, we just try to navigate that whole process for people and make that simple for them, hopefully. And NRCS a lot of times does a really good job with that. But sometimes, those guys, they may have a lot of applications on their plate, or they're dealing with a lot of different things at one time. And it's hard for them to really provide or have enough time to provide the level of guidance that, that maybe they should in some instances or would like to. It just doesn't work out. So, a lot of people find value in having somebody just assist them through that process, but there's so many things available, and it's not just USDA programs. I mean, there's a lot of good state-funded programs and some private-funded programs that are available to do some of the same type practices. So, Stewart Link's goal is to understand what that landowner wants, and then it's our job to match him up with the right program, get him eligible, and get him signed up. We can't guarantee that he gets funded, but we're going to try to put him in the best position possible to do that. And, if we get that, obviously there's a compliance side that goes along with it. We stay with them throughout the life of that contract and, help document the compliance, make sure we do what we're supposed to receive the cost share through the programs. But there are a ton of practices available. Weston's exactly right. I pulled up just the cost list for Mississippi here, and I mean, there's 24 pages of very fine just list of practices. And I mean, that's just the, practices to choose from. So if you hand that to the, an average landowner, it's pretty intimidating to decide, which ones we're going to go after.
Yeah. So Nick, you've already mentioned that there's several programs that a landowner might sign up for. What are the programs that you see folks that are interested in wildlife management on forested acreage primarily applying for? And also, does it require a separate application for each program?
Yeah. So there's really two primary programs that we normally would pursue, one being Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, and then the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, EQIP. Both of those programs you need two applications for now because due to the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a separate pool of money. Practices are similar, so you have a general CSP and a general EQIP, and then they call it IRA for Inflation Reduction Act, IRA CSP and an IRA EQIP. So maybe we want to apply for tree planting. Well, there's 4 programs that you could apply for that practice in, and probably all pay a little bit differently. So obviously we always factor that in and try to figure out what gives our landowner the best chance of getting funded. How do they rank? All these programs are competitive. So, you don't just go sign up and enroll and get funded. You need to put the most competitive application in the system that you can and, hopefully find the spot that has the highest payment rate. So, there's a lot of factors in that ranking system, but generally I believe, the more conservation you're applying to put on the ground, the higher you'll rank, I think is the goal. Now there's some other factors that go in there. Some watersheds get preferences and things like that. But I think a good rule of thumb is somebody who's applying to do the most conservation is going to have the best chance of getting funded.
Okay. And one other thing that I was curious about too is you mentioned, the probability of funding and making the application packet, I guess, more attractive or more fundable. Do the practices that a landowner proposes to use differ by region in terms of how likely they are to get funded? Like, are there certain priorities in different areas that are more likely to get funded?
Yes, that's a good question. That there is. The states have the ability. They set the priority resource concerns for the state, and then some states that might even come down to they break the state up into different regions. I know here in Mississippi we have 4 regions, and you can have different priority resource concerns. So whatever that priority may be. If you're hitting practices that address that resource concern, you get a little more ranking credit versus somebody who may not be.
Okay.
And that's, talking about, boys, it's starting to get complex. You start talking about a landowner that walks in the door who doesn't understand any of this. I mean, I try to remind myself of that all the time when I'm talking to somebody. USDA speaks in codes and resource concerns and acronyms, all these languages. And, I worked there for 12 years and been at Stewart Link for 10. And I mean, it's hard for me to understand sometimes, the terminology of exactly what it is we're trying to do. So you think about, just the average landowner, Marcus said that guy's got 200 acres of timberland who maybe has never even done anything at USDA before. Maybe never even been in the office. It can be pretty intimidating, for that guy just to, fill out the paperwork and understand what they're doing.
Gotcha.
And I can add on that just a little bit, Will. So, one really good example of just different practices in different areas, like they have one that they pay for longleaf pine establishment and maintenance. Sure. And so, anywhere where the native longleaf pine range was, that's what they're trying to target, just those areas. And so obviously they might get a little bit more preference in Mississippi per se, south, if they have that on their plan, versus just, some tree planting in central Mississippi. So it's not planting. So that'd probably be, a good example for what you're asking there.
Yeah. And while we were on that topic, y'all mentioned tree planting a few times. Is that mostly for, I guess in the Southeast, especially for loblolly conversion to longleaf, or are there other tree planting practices that commonly get funded too?
There's a lot. So there is oak planting. And so that on there, you're trying to target about 4 to 5 native oak species that you want to plant on an area. They have longleaf pine. They have a new kind of tree planting. They're calling it tree planting for carbon sequestration. And so in that, you could plant anything you want to, loblolly, longleaf, oaks. It's not really, set on what you have to plant there.
Oh, that's nice flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's just meant for carbon sequestration. So I think it's kind of competitive for some of these carbon programs that are out there. It's a pretty high payment rate, but you get it at one time versus some of them where you may get over 40 years. So, and then they have also shrub planting, shrub hedgerow planting for wildlife food. So that's where you get into maybe some Chickasaw plum or persimmon, crabapple, some more of your soft mass producing species as well. So they're like, when I said hundreds, these are all I'm talking about is, you can pick you can just really pick what you want to your property and be pretty specific for what you're trying to target.
Well, I was curious, guys. I was going to ask you about some specific practices, but I think before that, you guys said that I think it was CSP and EQIP were the primary two for people who are interested in wildlife that you're usually working on. What practices do those cover?
A lot. Hundreds.
This is why we don't know what any of these things do.
Can I help simplify the starting point here?
Yeah.
So we talk a lot on this podcast about canopy reduction and fire for turkeys. So what practices would help a landowner, implement those?
Yes. You want me to go, Nick?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So there's a couple different things. Let's just start off right there with thinning or just canopy reduction. So they have a enhancement code in CSP that is thinning for wildlife. And so the way it reads is you must thin down to 50 to 60 basal area minimum. Okay. So that right there, is something that a ton of pine stands across the Southeast need. There's another one called patch openings. And so that the base for that is between 2 and 10 acres. If you have an area, you may have 200 acres of hardwoods like Marcus was talking about. Well, your limiting factor there may be open ground or early successional habitat. And so those patch openings are meant to, between 2 and 10 acres, get a patch, and then you can't just immediately convert it to a food plot. It's set up to where the 5 years of your contract, you have to maintain it in early successional habitat. So whether that be disking, fire, maybe some mowing at the right time of year, but that's what it's set up for. So it's really good for your upland bird species and deer as well. And then there's a couple different prescribed fire practices that they pay for. And so one would just be, simple, sign up the acres, go burn it, you get paid on it. The next would be sequential patch burning. And so I like that one a lot because it sets up a landowner, if they want to burn 100 acres, well, it sets them up for a 3-year plan. And so they're going to roughly burn, 33 acres a year for 3 years. Well, as most of us know, that's going to be really good for your wildlife habitat to have, a little bit more heterogeneous landscape out there and have 3 different stages of growth from that fire. And so, you may be able to hit on a lot of different habitat types that they'll just say turkeys need for different points of their life. So
Okay.
it's really good ones.
So with the timber harvest, how does that work? Do you get can you still sell the timber and then you get money on top of that?
Yep. Yep,
Okay.
that's right. So they're going to pay a per acre rate, and it varies by state, but generally, I mean, just say it's around 300 an acre. And so, yeah,
Okay.
you can make that money off the cost share program and then make money from the logger that's out there. And, right now it's really, really good to be in that because as y'all know, I mean, there's not a lot of people making good money on pine timber right now. So,
Yeah, and I mean the other thing is we often, ask landowners to thin down below the volume that would be like optimal stocking density that would net them the most return at clear cut, at final harvest. So I guess that would help offset some of that loss
that's
by
right.
thinning
Yeah.
below optimal stocking.
That's exactly where I went with it. Is it may not be the optimal thing from a revenue standpoint, so that's helping offset that cost. That's cool.
Yeah.
What about for non-commercial, like if we were doing forest stand improvement, where we're going in and are there programs that cover activities like that, or
Yep.
daylighting, those kinds of things?
Yep. So they have what they call understory enhancement. And so that would be, removing all of your undesirable smaller species in the understory. And it doesn't really matter how you do it. It can be through hack and squirt. It can be girdle. It can be mulching. They're not really concerned with how it gets done. It's just, that it does get done. There is daylighting roads. And so for that one, it's going to be, it's got to be up to 35 foot on both sides. So you're basically making a 70-foot right of way, and it's set up to maintain early successional habitat on the sides of the roads. I think it says you can bush hog them once a year, but you're really kind of maintaining your normal road, and then the sides are going to be that early successional habitat. That's good for all types of species.
That's really interesting.
The other thing I wanted to ask about too is installing fire breaks is oftentimes a huge expense up front for landowners. So I understand that there are some programs that help with that as well.
Yep.
Yeah, no doubt. Both CSP and EQIP would help establish those fire breaks, get those in place. EQIP's probably a little bit better than CSP on that. It's going to be a little bit higher payment rate. But absolutely, that's a practice that we commonly use. I've used it on personal land within the last year, and it makes all the difference in the world because you're right. You start getting some of that heavy equipment on site and putting good fire breaks in. It's a huge expense, and something that's hard for a lot of landowners to pull the trigger on doing. Where if they could just get some reimbursement, some cost share, some help to get that in place, it'd allow them to manage their land. So that's that's a big part of it.
And some of the prescribed fire payments as well they're really high compared to what you could hire somebody to burn for you. And so that kind of offsets that fire break cost as well, which you can plan to get paid on the fire break specifically. But for that sequential patch burning, I think it pays $250 an acre roughly.
Oh, wow.
So, it's paying really well. And so it's going to pay for, somebody to burn it. It could pay for those fire breaks. It could pay for, prescribed burn manager to write you a good burn plan. And when I say burn plan, I'm not necessarily talking about day of like your smoke management plan.
Right.
I'm talking about, long term, 10-year plan that you have for a property. It could pay for some of those things as well.
Okay.
Wow.
What about woody herbicide, treatments? Trying to reduce the sweet gum in the understory is a common one we face in the southeast.
Yeah, so they have a herbaceous weed control or brush management control. So it's two different enhancements, and that's exactly what it's set up for: managing undesirable species, whether it be pasture grasses, trying to convert those into more old field management.
Oh, nice.
Or sweet gum in the understory, what it may be. And one thing that is awesome about, you can't do this with every practice or enhancement, but for a lot of these, you can stack them on top of each other. And so for like your example right there, you could probably stack burning, thinning, and then maybe herbaceous weed control on top of the same acres. And so, if you were to burn or thin and then burn, and you have a heavy sweet gum response, then you could go in there and spray it as well. And so stacking those on top of each other really help you get to your end goal of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there. That was going to be my follow-up question to Will's is how do we, like, are there programs to help us kill grass? Because we talk about that a lot. Invasive species, I don't know how often, but it's very often that I get asked how to kill Kogon grass and privet and, various other things. So it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity to help people deal with those problems.
Definitely.
No doubt. There could even be something specifically for Kogon grass. I know that some states have had some practices specifically for that.
Yeah, they
Florida doesn't have one, it should.
Yeah. Yeah.
They definitely have one that is specific to kudzu. I know that.
Yeah, it'd be easy to come up with a few dozen that they should probably have a program for pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So this is really, incredible to think about going back to our scenario that we keep using. A landowner with 200 acres of, let's just say it was previously industrial pine timberland that hit the market. They bought it up. It's mostly closed canopy, probably hasn't had fire in it in a long time, has, sweet gum that's grown up into a mid-story, if not co-dominant trees. So a landowner could apply for these programs and the practices under them and essentially have, get cost share to come in to thin the trees, to put in the fire breaks, to then spray, and then start the area on a burn rotation.
That's right. That's right. And
it sounds
I think
like
that's
potentially even keep it in a burn rotation.
Yes. And I think that's where working with, Steward Link helps out just a whole lot. Just because, we got somebody here that can make that plan for you. You don't have to go separate out to a wildlife biologist and a forester. We kind of do, lack of a better term, everything right here for somebody. So.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be the next thing that I was going to ask is when you successfully apply for one of these programs and the practices, does NRCS then tell you where you have to apply those, or do you kind of does the landowner get to make those decisions or work with somebody to help make those decisions of where they want to thin, where they want to burn, and, all that type of stuff?
Nick, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so it's all developed in a plan on the front end. So, it's up to the landowner. The landowner's the decision maker about where they want to apply for the practices. And then, of course, once you get approved, they're tied to a specific, it'd probably be assigned a field number, but you'd have a plan map that, shows where the fire breaks would be and, how many acres of prescribed burning and a schedule of operations to go along with that, to try to, lay out when those practices were going to take place. And, of course, Mother Nature sometimes changes, when things happen, and there's some flexibility there to modify contracts that, if things don't get done as they need to. Hopefully we can keep them on schedule, and most of the time we do, but there are some instances, obviously, where that doesn't happen. So, but yeah, Marcus, to reiterate what you said, our goal is usually to get at least into a 5-year contract. CSP contracts are always 5 years. So equip could be 1 year, or, they may be out to 5 years, but we really like to utilize both programs. In that scenario you were talking about, Will, we would probably try to put some fire breaks in and, maybe do some timber stand improvement practices through equip, but also have a CSP application on some of the more, management type things, burning, spraying, those type things, and utilize both programs together to really, help meet that producer's goals.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is probably, if you can, the best way to approach this is to kind of go into the application process with a plan for the property already in mind.
Yeah, that's right. The first step is just to get the application submitted. And that's just a fairly simple 3-page document that's expressing interest in the program. There's always a sign-up deadline, so that has to be submitted before that deadline. And then you'll have some time after that to get eligibility in order. We got to go to the office and fill out some forms, make sure we don't have any, wetland violations or HEL violations or, some issue there. We got to get all of that straight. which is usually fairly simple. But again, if it's a new producer or someone new that has not traditionally dealt with USDA, they probably have none of that on file. So, we'll go through the steps of getting that. And then at some point, soon after submitting the application, our goal at Stewart Link is to help the producer develop a plan and submit that to NRCS, really just as a request of if here's a list of practices that we're interested in, this is what we want to apply for. And, we want feedback from NRCS. Maybe they have some ideas about other practices that we could implement or, get some feedback, but just begin to work with the staff there on developing that plan that will be entered into their computer system. It goes through the ranking process and helps them decide which ones will be selected for funding and which ones may not. So that's kind of how the process works.
Yeah, when you get there to that part of the process with a landowner, do you see that? Do you see practices being pushed on them that they would prefer to avoid, or most of the additional practices that they would recommend dovetail pretty nicely into what they already had planned?
Yeah, I would say more often than not, there's just a whole lot of variability in it. But I met a lot of people who, were already enrolled in a conservation program and they wanted to talk about their contract. And what we found is that a lot of times it's really just a fraction of what they, could have done. And maybe it's just because they didn't know. We'll keep using that same example. Maybe what they wanted was fire breaks. They were going to do the burning and everything else on their own. And they went in, they just applied for fire breaks. And maybe they got a contract and that was it. Well, that's one of the advantages we think for using Stewart Link. Maybe we get into 5 years of cost share for burning. Maybe we also address those sweep gums and open the canopy up, do some thinning, do some other things where the landowner just didn't know. He just didn't know that was available, and it just didn't come up in conversation at the office or whatever the situation is. But really, all he asked for was fire breaks, and that was all he got. So
Yeah.
we've seen that happen quite a bit, and if you look at all the paperwork, everything that's involved, it's easy to see why. Because there's so many things available that people just don't know about. So that's the reason that I feel like a lot of people find value in having somebody to help them navigate the process. We talk about it. We use the comparison to having an accountant around here, quite a bit. You can go file your own taxes, but a lot of people don't. They hire a professional to help navigate that process. I know I do to make sure that I get it right, because I don't want to understand everything that the IRS has got going on. Somebody that knows it and understands it and make sure we get it right. So
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked that is I worked with a landowner several years ago that got some practices cost shared under EQIP, and I don't know the best way to put it, to sweeten the spot or sweeten the pot, so to speak. The NRCS staff person that they were working with asked that they add in some pollinator planting into it, and they wanted a native warm season grass mix planted. And I think we've talked about it a couple times on here before, Marcus, but I generally prefer to let those areas naturally revegetate instead of planting, because I feel like the grass density oftentimes is really high for turkeys when you plant it. But it was just kind of one of those things that it was only a few acres across several hundred acres, so it wasn't that big of a deal, but it kind of made the difference in them getting the contract or not.
Right. Yeah. So that's a really common one, actually. And part of it has to do with the timing, especially with the conservation stewardship program. A lot of these contracts, our application sign up deadline was this past Friday in Mississippi, November 1st. So, they'll take those applications and they'll rank them. A lot of times the contract may not be funded and signed, money obligated until, August or even early September.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fiscal year ends September 30th. So year one of that contract ends September 30th. A lot of times they have to complete something in the first 12 months of the contract, and the pollinator habitat is an easy one.
Mm-hmm.
that they can, just from a time frame standpoint, can go complete. And a lot of guys will plan that just to give them something to do, and you get a little credit in the ranking. So we've used that one quite a bit ourselves.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that is a common practice.
Okay. What you got, Marcus?
Well, I actually was going to ask about the pollinator practice, but I was just listening to you guys. I was just thinking, I mean, like every landowner that I go work with, I recommend maybe a dozen or more practices that we've already talked about that they probably, and I do talk to landowners about seeking out opportunities for this, but it's too complex. I mean, like you guys are saying, we really need the support from people like you that understand these programs and are trying to stay up on them, because I can't keep up with them. And that's the same thing I get from landowners is they commonly are like, yeah, that's great that there might be some things that I can take advantage of, but a lot of them don't follow up on it, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard for us to keep up with, and I mean it's what we're doing for a living, and there's maybe one manual for EQIP, one program manual for CSP, but what you find is they're administered a little differently from state to state. Each program is just handled a little differently. You get down to the county level, and it's different from county to county, depending on maybe who works there, how they interpret a practice, and we've had to learn how to be flexible enough to work through all of that. And I think we've definitely gotten better at it than we were to start with. When we first started, I just assumed everybody worked like Mississippi does, and that's not the case. We figured that out real quick. So we've learned a lot on that, but now there's so many good things out there available through these programs that people just don't know about. But the process of getting applied and getting to a contract seems fairly simple if you're working at USDA, or me and Weston deal with this all day, every day. It wouldn't be hard for us to go down here and go through the process because we know, but you have to kind of change your mindset to somebody who's never dealt with USDA before. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's intimidating. And, you just don't feel like you ever get there. You'd like to just go to the office and sign up for the program, and then hopefully you get in. Well, that's not how it works. You go down there and they don't even know who you are. Well, you got to go back, you got to bring your deed, and you got to get in the system. You got to prove to them that you own land first before you can apply for it. And, then you got to fill out this paperwork. Well, maybe you missed the deadline. It's going to be 8 months before we can apply again. And people just get discouraged. They just don't come back. So, we try to do a fairly decent job of explaining to people who sign up with Steward Link is, this may not happen quick. We're going to get your information, establish what your goals are. Let's develop a plan and let us take the ball and run with it. Now, the government doesn't work fast on this, and those offices have a lot on them. So there's a cycle that we have to go through. So, if somebody walks in our office here today, they missed the sign up deadline by a week. So, we're already another year down the road before we even submit an application.
Right. So when y'all start talking to landowners about this, other than the difficulty around the application process, what are some other like barriers to entry that they commonly cite? Like, is there anything else that comes up that prevents them from wanting to pursue these programs?
Boy, there's all kind of reasons. Yeah, some people just don't want to deal with the government.
Right. I'm sure I'm sure that one's one, but
that's what I was going to say. I can relate as a landowner, and I have very precise knowledge of what I want to accomplish, and now I'm understanding there are programs, and I still don't want to go work with the government on it.
I would say probably the biggest one is a lot of people maybe have been to that office and inquired and just had a bad experience. And that's might not even be NRCS's fault. It's just the nature of that job. As I worked in that position, I understand how that works as well.
Yeah.
It's not always easy from that side.
Yeah.
They've got a whole different perspective on it. Everything they have to get done, and I mean, those guys deal with a lot of frustration as well, and I fully understand that. But I think a lot of times people who've just been inquired and they just don't feel like they can get it, or it's too much trouble, and they just get discouraged and just don't even pursue it anymore.
Mm-hmm. So, do you commonly hear many concerns about fear of being locked into some kind of contract and not being able to maybe
Oh
do what
yeah.
they want to with the land?
Yeah, a little bit. In one program we really hadn't even talked about, of course, is Conservation Reserve Program, CRP.
Mm-hmm.
Most everybody's familiar with that one. And that's where, you're agreeing to take some land out of production. And, there's a nesting period. There's a set time of year that you can't go out there, bush hog, maintain, do different
Mm-hmm.
things. Um, you're getting an annual payment for managing that land
Yeah.
in accordance with your conservation plan that NRCS provides. So these are working lands programs. These aren't taking land out of production. CSP and EQIP are working lands programs. So it's just to enhance the land conservation practices that you select.
Mm-hmm.
Now, USDA obviously has some easement programs. A common one here where we're at is wetland reserve easement. Used to be wetland reserve program. But that's where the government's actually buying a perpetual easement on the land. You still own it. You still, control access to it, things like that, hunt, fish, all of that. But USDA has bought a perpetual easement. They control what the surface is going to look like and, how you'll manage it. So that's a fairly common one. People are a little bit concerned about getting into a contract with USDA, but we try to do a pretty good job of explaining that, these are term contracts. Maybe it's 5 years. Each practice has a lifespan. If you agree to plant trees, hardwood trees, for an example, that practice has a lifespan. I don't know it off the top of my head, but we'll say it's 40 years.
15.
Is it 15? Okay, I thought it'd be longer than that. But if you planted trees, you're agreeing to keep those trees out there for at least 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just plant them and then 5 years long, as soon as that contract's over, come out there and, mow them down or mulch them or whatever it may be. You've got to keep that practice, operate and maintain that practice for the life of the practice. So each practice code has a lifespan.
And does that follow the property if it changes ownership? So, like if the landowner wanted to sell it, would the new owner be able to do anything with that 15 acres?
Yeah,
Or
so
I'm sorry, not 15 acres, but the area
the
where it was
tree,
treated is
right.
locked in that was planted and is locked in for 15 years.
Yeah, so whoever signed the contract is agreeing to that. Now, if they sell their land, um, you know, uh, hopefully they convey that to the
Mm-hmm.
buyer.
Right.
But I think the way that would work, and I've never experienced this on Equip or CSP. I have on CRP.
Okay.
But if the buyer was unaware that those were paid for, and he just went out there and cleared all that up, USDA could recover that cost from the person who signed the contract.
Okay. Interesting.
So I've seen an instance or two in CRP where you know the seller may have his land enrolled in CRP, and then once he sold, the buyer didn't want it, so he went out there and just mowed it down or put it back into production or changed the land use, whatever. Well, USDA was able to recover that cost from the seller.
Good to know.
So it's always important, I think, in a land transaction to make sure that that's in the contract, that the seller will agree to assume any active contracts you may have. So that was a good question.
Yeah, that's important to know. So we've talked a lot about practices in forested areas, but I understand we were talking a little bit before we started recording that y'all are working in 15 states, and many of those are in the Midwest too. So maybe that would provide kind of an opportunity to talk about how practices differ by region. And then I imagine once you get into the Midwest, there's a lot more focus on the CRP practices, the more agricultural focused practices. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so. We do have contracts in 15 states now, and hopefully expanding that. We got applications in several more, but um, primarily out of Mississippi, we focused on ag production. We do have a handful of timberland and wildlife related applications that we've assisted folks with. That's part of our business. We're trying to grow and looking for applications. Um, you know, focused on wildlife outside of Mississippi, but um, a lot of the common practices are more to that ag production, nutrient management, pest management, cover crop, hopefully reduce tillage, maybe no till. But there's usually some wildlife type stuff incorporated as well. There may be some field borders. The pollinator habitat is very common. Some filter strips, holding shallow water for waterfowl. Those type things. So that's been the more common, I would say, practices that I can think of right off the top of my head on our out of state applications.
Okay.
But all these practices we've talked about, are available everywhere. Obviously there's some specific to different parts of the country that just, don't work in other regions. But
Well, I have two questions that are kind of related. One, are there other restrictions or things that it might keep the landowner from being able to do? I realize, like, if they plant trees, they can't go and mulch those up or, disc up their fields or whatever. But are there other things that some contracts might be restricting that we haven't talked about?
I can't think of anything right off the top of my head. One thing that we try to do, each practice has a practice summary, and it speaks specifically to the criteria for that practice, exactly what a landowner's agreeing to do, exactly what they're going to have to provide to NRCS as documentation. So it's all laid out in black and white. No questions about what everybody is getting into, what the term is, the requirements, everything that's got to happen to receive that payment. So we try to go over that with our clients as best we can on the front end, help them understand, make sure we understand. And we haven't had a lot of issues. I can't think of anything just right off the top of my head that where we've run into issues, especially on the wildlife side of things. I mean, we've had some instances where people just didn't do what they said they were going to. And, then obviously we couldn't document it. We got into a contract modification. We had to push it down the road a year. But as far as restrictions on the land, I mean, we haven't. I can't think of anything that would fall under that.
Yeah, I mean, really the only thing is, I mean, there's some practices that we were talking about stacking things on acres. Well, there's some practices you can't stack on the same acres. And like one may be just say prescribed fire and bat habitat. So you're creating some snags for bat trees, and you can't do prescribed fire on those same acres because they don't want you to burn up, the bat trees you just created. So there's a couple of restrictions like that. Just you can't do this in this same area, but not anything major.
Mm-hmm.
What about from the other side of it? That was the other related question. Are there things that might disqualify a landowner from, being eligible? Because you guys were talking about making sure you're eligible. Are there examples of things that might?
So the eligibility requirements, first off, you've either got to own the land or you've got to be the operator. Okay, so if you don't own the land, you've got to have a lease that gives you effective control of it on record at USDA. You got to be one of those two things to apply for the program. So whoever the applicant is, whoever's applying, has got to be in compliance with the highly erodible lands and wetland provision. So, you can't be out of compliance on HEL or obviously not have any wetland violations on record. So if you're compliant there, the adjusted gross income requirement, it usually changes a little bit each farm bill right now. Well, they skipped the previous year, so we're in fiscal year 25. You would skip 2024 and look at the three previous years, so 21, 22, 23. the average adjusted gross income has to be below $900,000. So as long as you're under that, you're eligible. If your average adjusted gross income is over 900,000, then you're ineligible. Good problem to have. So,
and one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we touched on, and us talking about that just prompted me to circle back to this thought, is that we've kind of been speaking in generalities, and I think everybody understands now that there's money available to help implement these practices. But can y'all throw out like, and maybe it's too complicated to do this because it varies so much from one practice to another, but like what percentage of these practices would you say on average are being paid for or being cost shared?
I had that same question.
Too complicated?
well, are you speaking like what percentage of the applications are being?
No, more
approved?
so like how much financial assistance are these landowners getting with these practices?
Okay, so yeah, I'll try to answer, and you can follow up with more specific questions. But so for CSP, for an individual, the maximum contract payment allowable is $200,000. That's over the 5-year term, so they can get $200,000. We've helped a lot of people get $200,000. For EQIP, that's $450,000 is the
Okay.
limitation there.
Wow.
So as far as what practices are available, I mean, it gets back to that application as a whole. It doesn't really matter about what practices. We want to add a lot of practices because, we think that's going to increase our ranking score. We want to get back to that goal of what's the landowner trying to achieve and utilize both programs. I mean, we've got clients that'd be more either somebody who has a lot of land or maybe it's a row crop operation, but would have contracts, maxed out for both programs. Would be the ideal situation. 200 acres is probably not going to get us there, but we can still. You'd be surprised if depending on how much management, what all they want to do, to how quickly you can get to those limitations.
So I guess a follow up to that. What proportion of the overall cost of the practice is being covered?
Yeah. So, let's see, what year I started working for NRCS back in 2002, I believe it was. Yeah. At that point in time, NRCS, you had to bring in your receipts for a practice.
Right.
And they paid a percentage.
Right.
Usually 50 to 75% of those invoices, not to exceed a certain rate. Well, back, I'm trying to think of which farm bill it was. It's been over 10 years. I was still working for NRCS. I'm gonna say somewhere around 12 or 14 years ago. They scrapped that cost share program, and it's just a payment rate now. They have a payment schedule. So if they're going to pay, 20 cents per foot to put a fire break in, if you can get it done for 10 cents, you made 10 cents per foot. If it costs you 50 cents a foot to put it in, well, you're going to have to come out of pocket with 30. So there's a standard to meet for the practice, a spec you've got to meet. So as long as you've done that, they're going to come out and see that you've done it to the standard and, as planned, and then they're going to pay you that set amount. So there's just a flat payment rate for each practice.
And I guess it's the same deal. Like if they give you, $40 an acre to implement prescribed fire, but you go out there and you burn yourself, you just pocket that.
Oh yeah. So exactly. So yeah. And to answer the question, Marcus, yeah. So I would say most practices, the payment rate is more than it takes to do it a lot of times, especially if you have the ability to do some stuff on your own.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a really great incentive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is. And everybody we work with, they get very excited about it because, they can go buy a new disc, new tractor, really put that money into some structural or equipment or, some things to really improve that property. And so, NRCS is going to put this money in for these practices to get done, but they're also, for the next couple of years, there's going to be a lot of improvements done outside of that too. So.
Okay.
There's just so
And
much variability in each situation.
Mhm.
I think back to that, reduced forest stand density. I mean, we've had a
yeah,
lot of guys here in our region who have used that practice. And I mean, they had to pay somebody to come in
yeah,
and cut trees, really a pre-commercial thinning where trees just
right,
didn't have any value,
yeah.
just to open it up,
That's becoming
versus
more
someone,
common. Yeah,
yeah, versus someone who maybe has some, value in their timber, can get it thinned. They're getting money for the timber plus, getting the practice implemented. So each situation is a little bit different on that.
how are the payments dispersed? I mean, is it like, you get the contract and then they, disperse the full amount for the year at the beginning of that fiscal year? Or is it that you have to, bring in proof that you've implemented practices and then they're paying for them? How does that all shake out?
So both programs are different. Of course, everything's always different. CSP, there is an annual payment at
Hmm.
the end of each fiscal year. As a matter of fact, they're being paid right now. It usually starts late November or late October and on into November. You'll get an annual payment for all the practices you had planned for this year. And yes, you've got to provide that documentation to show that you've done all of that.
Okay.
Equip is scheduled by practice. So, if you have prescribed burning plan, once you've done that, you can get paid for that practice when you've completed it. It doesn't necessarily have to be an annual payment. You may get multiple practices completed throughout a year and get multiple payments through Equip.
Okay.
They could pay you per practice for Equip.
Okay.
So that's one thing to note on CSP. Sometimes tree plant is another good example. You may plant trees in January or February, whenever, and that's a cost that you have to,
Hmm.
bear to start with, because you're not going to get your reimbursement until the end of the year, calendar year.
Okay. That's good to know. What else you got, Marcus? We covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, it's exciting too because I think this information is going to get a lot of people motivated to go get some stuff done.
I agree.
Are there any things that you guys see as really important for folks to know that we haven't asked you about? Like, what are we missing?
Well, I'll just reiterate a little bit, and I'll let Weston speak to that as well. But I don't want to give the perception that this is just easy. You just walk in up there and get it. There's a reason that people use a company like Stewart Link as a consultant, because it is complicated, it is complex, it takes some time. There's some frustration from both sides. I don't want to lay all the blame off on NRCS. I know they're dealing with a lot of frustration at times as well. But we don't want to, overpromise. We want to overdeliver at Stewart Link.
Yeah.
Hopefully, is what our goal is. So we just want people to know that we'll help anybody, but we need to be in it for the long haul. Let's get our eligibility straight. Let's get an application on file. If we're in the next year cycle, that's fine. Let's have everything ready, and let's identify what practices we want to go after, and we'll make sure that goes through the system, is ranked. If we don't get funded, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to get a ranking report back, and we can sit down and look at that, and we can talk about, what we could do to possibly improve it for the next go around. So, I mean, we've got people we've been working for 10 years now. And I mean, some guys, we've had 4 or 5 years, never gotten approved for a contract in Mississippi. Is very
Oh, wow.
competitive here. Now, hopefully, we're at a point in time where there's a lot more money available right now. So hopefully some of that's going to change. But, it can be a long drawn out process. And I mean, there are people who come in just at the right time and are signed up for the right stuff and, get funded right off the bat. So our goal is to put people in the best position possible. We don't, guarantee them anything. The good thing about our service is it is 100% risk free. We don't charge anything if we don't get anything. So, we'll work for free up until they get paid. So.
I'll add just a little bit. I mean, a lot of folks that I've talked to, they think, more or less, they think it's just free money. Well, you do have to, do these things in order to get a payment. Talking to somebody, it's like, you mean I got to go out there and cut some trees down? It's like, yeah, that's what you signed up for. And we work with them on the front end and let them know all that. It's just, I guess, sometimes it gets lost in the conversation
Yeah.
of, this is what you're signing up for, and you're going to have to get it done. It's not, just free money to put in your pocket. And then another thing, and Nick kind of just mentioned it a little bit, is, take a chance as a landowner. You are not tied to anything at all until you sign that contract. So, they're going to call you and say, hey, you just got approved. Come sign your contract, please. And you're not tied to anything until you sign the dotted line. And so, having an application in is great, and just, being able to have the opportunity to get funded. And you won't ever get funded if you don't have an application in and go through that process. And so just take a chance, and you can always say no or back out at any time. So.
Okay. So let's just say if you do sign the contract, because I could see this would be something that would give me pause as a landowner. You sign the contract, and let's just make it simple. And we plan to burn, a bunch of acreage this year. And, I break my leg, and I was planning on burning it. And I broke my leg. I couldn't do it this year. It sounds like there's still some flexibility that the contract can be modified so that if, just something crops up in life that prevents you from implementing a practice in 1 year, that you could do it later on. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We've had all kind of issues over the years arise, and NRC has been very good about having some flexibility to
Okay.
help people, modify contracts. When extenuating circumstances happen, that keep you from doing that. So
Yeah.
it's really, you get to deal with a lot of people. It's more common than you would think. There's
Okay.
always some contract modifications. So
Yeah, I mean, I read a modified contract yesterday that it was just, they put a note in there when they modify something, and I mean, it just said it was simple as cover crops couldn't be planted on these acres due to inclement weather throughout cover crop planting season. So I mean, Mother Nature, they're going to understand a lot of those things. Talking about how bad the timber market is right now. If you can't get somebody there to thin your trees, you can maybe push that back a year. Logging contract may be 24 months. Well,
Yeah.
if they didn't come that first year when they're supposed to, we could maybe move it back a little bit to where it's in that second year of that logging contract. So there is some flexibility.
That's good to know. And it also is, I mean, you guys have dealt with this a lot more than I have, so, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've gotten the impression that those NRCS offices get excited when they have landowners come in that are really wanting to enhance wildlife habitat and stack those practices, as y'all have, to use the term that y'all have several times today.
yeah, I think so. There's obviously a lot of different personalities. I mean, you deal with a lot of different offices. So, our goal is to work really good with those guys. I mean, we want to obviously serve our clients, but a big part of it is building a relationship with NRCS.
Sure.
And hopefully providing some value to them. So we've got to do the best job we can, and hopefully taking away some of the busy work for them, maybe help the landowner get all that eligibility stuff done, get a farm and tract number, get their deed in, and develop a plan. And, we try to approach it. I mean, and this is 100% true. We certainly don't know everything about, conservation programs. It's always changing, and it's a little bit different every state you go into and every county. So, we go in there with a plan, and we want their feedback. So, let's figure out how to work together. We should all three, being NRCS, Steward Link, and the landowner, we've all got the same goal. We're trying to put conservation on the ground. So, let's all figure out how to work together and do something good for the land. And most of the time that works, but, we've had a lot of different situations arise where there were challenges, and it's always just personalities. And
people are people everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess one last question: what, if a landowner is interested in getting in touch with you guys and getting going, with something, what do they need to do or need to be thinking about?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that, Marcus. So, I would just ask people to, go to our website, stewardlink.com, and we've got a button there you can click and submit just some very general information, contact information, and somebody from our office here will give you a call, or, people are welcome to call here directly to the office. Our number is 662-535-0233. And, we'd love to, help whoever we can.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you guys' time today. That was very informative for me, and I'm sure it was for a lot of our listeners as well.
Yeah, I had no idea there were so many practices, and like I'm telling people to do things that they may be able to apply for funding to help them do.
Yeah, I'd say almost every single site visit that y'all would go on, you would say, everything that you would tell somebody to do, there is most likely a practice that lines up exactly. And it may be, a little bit more specific to do this or that, but I mean, it's going to be generally that same, the same thing you're telling them to do already. So.
Good stuff.
Thank you all for allowing us to come on. This is
For sure.
Yeah, we were really thankful to have you guys. Appreciate the time.
This one's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're finally addressing this because we get asked about it all the time. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to walk us through it.
Yeah.
It's a common issue. We've helped a lot of people, and there's still, there's so much opportunity, so many people looking for some assistance. So, we're trying to figure it out and help as many as we can.
All right. Well, I guess nobody has anything else. Appreciate everybody out there listening. We appreciate all the feedback, and this is another one of those episodes. It was a long time coming because we kept getting asked about it.
Yeah.
So thanks for the feedback. Thanks for listening. Thanks for helping support the podcast. We appreciate all of you.
Absolutely. Thank y'all.
All right. Thank y'all. See ya.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.